I've never. I am so hard to do.
All right, I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Today is the 31st of January. Will you call the roll, please? Clerk Sandsted.
Yes, I will. Member Gorham.
Present.
Chair Kirby.
Here.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
Here.
Member Lofald.
Here.
Member Oswald.
Here.
I am here. Member Trinka.
Here.
Superintendent Gronseth.
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Starzecki.
Here.
Deputy Clerk Hassler.
Excused.
All right. Secretary Dolans, excused. And Secretary Tebot, also excused. And our student reps are excused. Oh, they are? Oh, hi. Welcome, Mr. White. Thanks for joining us. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, welcome everybody to this presentation about full-service community schools, and I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Starzecki.
Thank you. Tonight we have with us Kyle Surratt from the National Education Association. I met Kyle, yay Kyle. I met Kyle in Milwaukee when we brought a team of community and educators, community members and educators to learn more about what full-service community models look like and how to do the work well. And in that presentation over the many days we were there, we felt like it would be good that more people heard what this model really looks like when it's done well and the impact that this model is having in other districts across the country. So what Kyle is going to share with you are some best practices learned from other districts who are doing this work well. I think one of the things that resonated with me when we met in Milwaukee is this is an important equity strategy that many districts across the country are finding success in, and given this is a very important topic to our community as well as across the state and the nation, we felt it was really important that we learn more about this model, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about how it's more than maybe some of the traditional thought process around wraparound services or after-school programming, and it's really about looking at the whole child. And
he was here 3 years ago.
And he was here before, so this is not his first visit to Duluth. He was well aware of what he was getting into, right? And this morning he spent some time with us. We had a group of educators and community members hear a similar presentation that you'll hear today, and then there was a smaller group of us who met afterwards to do some action planning for some potential next steps in the district. But what I hope you hear tonight is how this potentially could be a strategy for our district and how it could be part of a strategic plan. So with that, I will pass it to Kyle.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. And I still need to get, I think, was it Betty's Pies? That's, even though I know it's not. Someone said it's not made here anymore. So I'm Kyle Surratt, and I work at the NEA, which is the National Education Association, largest union in the country, largest education organization in the country. And we have a whole big department dedicated to school improvement. And I would say for for lack of a better word, pretty obsessed with like what it takes to like make schools improve, right? And to do that sustainably, like not like a sugar high, right? Like it gets better, then it gets worse, right? Like what sustainably can do that? So the good news is that we have 14,000 school districts in our country. Did you know that? 14,000 school districts house 98,000 schools. So whenever anyone says the good news, it usually comes with the bad news. The bad news is that a lot of our districts don't talk to each other. There's not like, it doesn't work similar to medicine where if a cardiac surgeon learns a great new procedure that will save 20% more lives, that then it's kind of how it's done in the medical field. Like education is atomized in a way that, in a good way that like local decision makers kind of figure out what's going to work in your schools, but in a bad way in that folks that are right next to each other or right across the country from each other that are working on the same issue of equity, one figures it out, but the other one is unaware of the strategy that they did. So we try to play a connecting role between districts and superintendents and educators and beyond. So that's what I want to talk to everyone about. So I'm here to answer your questions as well. So if you have a question that's like burning, ask it right in the middle, right? That's the whole point of today. Like just go and ask all the questions, you too. Like, because I will be flying back to DC tomorrow at 6 a.m. These guys do have my phone number, but really ask every question that you have. That's the goal of today. So often when I talk to school board members, some that aren't totally new, they've experienced something that sometimes a district will have someone come in with a proposal that says, here is something that will totally help you do this or help you do that, right? It's worked here and here, and we want it to work, and you should buy this or do that here. And a lot of times districts adopt those things, and then what they said was going to happen didn't actually work here, and then you end up not using that anymore, right? So a lot of programs come in, get used, and then kind of go away. Is that somewhat familiar? You don't have to admit it here, but that tends to be the case kind of all over the country. And this is what I want to, this is like a little mystery, if you like mysteries. So why is it that most districts, when they're trying to figure out strategies, they don't like just make up, they like do a bunch of research on like whether something will work. But the question is why do so many of these strategies that have a lot of, and I'm going to stand up and, like a lot of academics have PhDs that have like studied it, they've designed interventions, they've done field trials, they, have a lot of evidence that it works, and then they go and move it into other districts, and then a lot of times after districts adopt it, it just doesn't work, right? Or it doesn't work as advertised. So that to us is like a real big mystery of like, why is this happening in almost every district we've been in? And the evidence that we've learned is that it's because it's evidence that it can work, not that it will work in places. So I'm just trying to give you a quick tool of like, as you guys are school board members, like just because people say it can work doesn't mean it will work. And this is an example of a reading recovery program that's kind of gotten marketed to various districts. And this is the evidence that it works. This is what this chart displays. And there's this 0.7 effect size. It's saying like, this really works. But if you look at what actually happened with this reading recovery first grade literacy program, some of it really did work. There's like some amazing positive deviance, but sometimes it didn't work. So even in the place where there's a lot of evidence that it does work, it didn't work. So then we try to go to another place and say, this worked here, But in reality, it worked and it didn't work. So what we find is that what you need to think about is how do you have good systems for problem solving so that as new programs come in, that you're shifting so that you can accommodate your local conditions as opposed to just say, this doesn't work, move on to the next thing, right? So let's go to community schools. So to us, the best community schools provide that layer of adjustments for any strategy you want to use inside your schools. So that's why we believe it has had the results that it has done all across the country. So I want to tell you a few stories. So I was just thinking like bedtime stories because my kids, I have a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and they love me making up stories. So we're not going to do one about like little hermit crabs, all right? Because, all right, so anyway. Webb Middle School.
I'm just going to attempt to get you a little louder because you're also on television.
Oh, right, good.
So
These are stories about schools that are community schools. They weren't community schools, then they became community schools. So in 2009, Webb Middle School, which is now Webb K-8 in Austin, Texas, was the lowest performing school in all of Austin. And parents had pretty much given up on this school. The educators in this building were kind of dejected. They weren't close to their vision of what they wanted to see in their schools. And because their enrollment was so low, the district just decided we should probably close this school down. No one wants to be here anyway. But the community kind of fought back a little bit and said, wait, this school used to be good. I remember this school being good. See what you can do. So they put forward a proposal before the school board and the superintendent and said, don't close our school. Give us a chance to really change our strategies. We're going to do the community school strategy here. So their enrollment was at 485. Anyone know what farm means other than farm? All right, free and reduced meals. As I was saying to earlier folks, sometimes I forget to explain that, and people are like, 97% farms in the middle of Austin, which you will not find there. So the reason why I put this here is farm is a measure of poverty. So this school, back in 2009, when it was the lowest performing school, 97% of the student population was in poverty, as we call it, related here. And it was the lowest performing, and it had a graduation rate of 48%. So they track kids to high school and figure out what their graduation rate. Today, it's the highest performing Title I school in Austin. They've doubled their enrollment. Now, why might enrollment double at a school like this? And I'll give you just one other piece of background, that in Austin, you kind of send your children anywhere. Like, you're not bounded just by the school where you're at. You can kind of go anywhere. So why might enrollment have doubled? What do you think? Yes? Yeah. Well, they not only welcomed them, they made it a place where people wanted to go. That's simply it. So they remodeled their whole school around the stakeholders. They did not make this a school of that limited who could go. They actually increased those who were in poverty inside that school. The ELL, which is English language learners, went from 50% up to 60%. So they built it around the current students who are inside those buildings, the current families that make it up, and the community around. So there are 5 charter schools that are around Webb Middle School and that are kind of competing for families in those locations, and they were able to double their enrollment while having those 5 schools surrounding them. So families literally just wanted to go there because they heard it was a safe, good school that would give them the opportunities that they wanted. So you're going to see this over and over and over, where there are community schools that are high performing, that their enrollment tends to grow pretty dramatically. So this is another example, Reagan High School. Reagan High School, similarly, was the lowest performing high school in all of Austin. Their attendance rate was 88%, graduation rate 48%, which is quite low for those who don't know. Student mobility was 41%. Anyone know what student mobility is?
Either like shifting to different schools,
Yeah.
in and out, dropping out, coming back in semester.
Yeah, like a family kind of moves maybe because of jobs or this or that, and they kind of leave that school. And there were no students that earned any like AP or on like college level classes back then. And so this was kind of the nadir of Reagan High School. And then similarly, like Webb, they wanted to close the school. But the community, in this example, it's a little bit more funny. They used to have like a good football team. So there are all these like folks that remembered they were like boosters, you know. They're like, we used to have a great football team. You're not going to close our school, right? So the boosters and the community, they kind of remembered that this used to be an amazing school. Don't close our school, make it better. So they similarly decided we're going to do the community school strategy. So now they've more than doubled their enrollment. Attendance is on the rise, 95%. Graduation rate, 90%, which is amazingly different than 48%. Student mobility has gone down to 30%. So what's that mean? That means they're stabilizing families. They figured something out there, right? And this last year, 12 students earned an associate's degree before even graduating from high school. So they've really transformed their outcomes. So as school board members, we're like, wow, is this a shiny new toy that he's talking about that will come here and not work, right? That's what you guys should be thinking about. So this is an example. I just showed you two examples from one city, but has it ever worked on like a whole district level? That's a good question to know, right? So I'm going to tell you an example. So Cincinnati is an example where the whole city decided we are going to use a community school strategy. Over time, Cincinnati kind of fell from its heyday for various reasons. Middle class, rich, businesses left, and that left folks that didn't have any mobility, which are generally folks that are poor. By 2001, they were the lowest performing district in all of Ohio. And enrollment had gone to a severely low rate. They didn't know what to do. But what they decided to do in 2001 was make all their schools, the school board passed a policy that said, we're going to make all of our schools into community schools. So it took them a little while to figure out how they were going to get it all done. Because we don't have 5 hours, I'll tell you the short story. Today, 45 out of the 52 schools are community schools. They had an achievement gap between black and white of 14.5%. Now it's only 4.5%. They're now the highest performing urban district in all of Ohio. That's measured by like test scores type stuff. And a kid is not a test score, right? It's like there's a lot of things that measure, but Ohio, that's kind of how they document that stuff. So, but you know, it is an indicator. Graduation rate was only 51% across the district. Now it's 82%. Now 82% is not like, you're not going to like have a big rally about 82%, but it's way better from where they were, which is the point. And then there's this one neighborhood in Lower Price Hill, which is a neighborhood in Cincinnati, where 85% of the students were dropping out by the 10th grade, and now 62% are going to college. So now we have a school in Austin, 2 schools in Austin. We've learned all across the country that there's individual school examples of community schools able to achieve the vision that stakeholders have always wanted and worked hard to do, but they actually got it and did it. And then a whole district did it. Question is, so like you can find them in Tennessee, in California. Because we don't have a lot of time, I'm not going to spend, but you'll get copies of this and you can look very closely at it. Maryland, all across the country, Minnesota, you guys probably heard of Brooklyn Center, right? Cut the behavioral references in half from 2009 to 2014. So there are examples from all over the country where schools have gone from D to B, or, you know, they grade schools now. And a whole state actually decided to make their schools into community schools. Did you guys know that? You're like, just learning this now. Kentucky, if you went back to the 80s, which I remember somewhat fondly, or may I just say I just slightly remember it, they were the lowest performing state in the country for a long time, right? And in the country. And they were 47th in state and local spending and post-high school college enrollment, just kind of in every category. Then a group filed a lawsuit which resulted in this act, the CARA Act. And that act was an equity act. So you could see it. This is a Supreme Court mandate equity lawsuit that happened. And as a result of that, they passed CARA, which mandated all of their schools to become community schools. Now, in Kentucky, they call them Friskies, and it's a kind of a fun name for it. You guys want to call your community schools Friskies too? Family Resource Centers. So it's an acronym. But so like we were talking about earlier, they didn't consult a communication, team. But you should really Google Friskies in Kentucky. They have these, they have a lot of pride in their Friskies, because what it's done is taken them from basically last in the country to number 27th. So they've risen to kind of the middle of the pack of states in terms of their performance. They have the 9th highest graduation rate, 13th lowest high school dropout rate, and folks are flying all over the country to see what they did. To see the nice Friskies. I did. I went to I had to use my GPS, and I went there. I was there on a learning tour. We were making a video about them, and I got to the GPS, and I was like, "This cannot be one of the schools." It was like a little gas station, and I went into the station, and they were like, "You're not from around here," and they told me the school was right up the street, and I found it. But anyway, they had a great community school and very welcoming and everything. But what I learned here is that community schools don't have to only be in kind of city environments. They could be in really rural areas and still work. So we've found that they work in urban and suburban and exurban and rural, and also, kind of every environment that you can imagine. So that's the stories I want to tell you about community schools. I could talk all day about these things, right? And I do today, in fact. But I want to tell you about one thing that we learned when we were obsessively studying these things. The vast majority of community schools that we found didn't achieve their vision. They just didn't get to. They didn't have that story. It was Cincinnati was the lowest performing urban district, and then Cincinnati is the lowest performing urban district. So that was interesting to us, concerning and interesting, because we had some that had totally transformed and achieved their vision. And then we had a big majority that hadn't achieved its vision. So then we learned something. We learned that saying community school is almost like saying the word car. Now, if I tell you I have a car, you kind of have a few things that pop into your mind. 4 wheels, maybe 4 doors, right? But you don't know whether it's a Tesla, Lamborghini, a Prius, jalopy, right? So it turns out that community schools have a wide variety of quality and characteristics. So what we cared a lot about was this. What did they do? Why did those schools do the same thing? Or did they all do wildly different things? And why did these not achieve their vision? And why did the other ones achieve their vision? That's what we cared about. So we spent a good 3 or 4 years looking at that. And the next time I come down, I'm going to tell you about what they did. I'm just joking. I'll tell you that. All right, so here's about what the best community schools have done. So what we found is that every single one of the best community schools did at least these 4 things. So we found tons of community schools that tried to become a community school, and they didn't hire what's called a community school coordinator. And you guys have some of those here in your district. Now, all community school coordinators are not created equally, we found. There's some community school coordinators that that kind of occupied a parent coordinator role. So they just didn't have the skills to kind of do the strategy as you would imagine is necessary that we'll talk about. They all did this needs and asset assessment and clarified their vision. So anyone want to tell me what a needs and asset assessment is? Just like some things are like totally self-explanatory and other things aren't. This one's totally self-explanatory. So needs and asset.
So it's going into your community and asking them what they need.
Yeah.
And then, surveying that and grabbing that. And then what are the things that are going well in that community? And a list of those.
Yeah, that's it. Like community school coordinator, like even the word community school, that's kind of like, what's that word even mean? Is that a neighborhood school? Like literally, we've polled. No one knows what the term community school means unless like maybe you have a full service community school in your district or you're a member of the school board or something, right? But
don't you think a lot of people think they have a community school?
oh yeah, and it's like, oh, I went to a community school. I'm in a community school, but it turns out
they have community education. They have classes in the evening.
yeah. But they use it synonymously with neighborhood school. Like, I have a neighborhood school, I have a community school. But so that's like, if I was born 100 years ago when they started naming these things, like I would have intervened in the Frisky thing, and I would have also intervened in the community school naming thing. Because community school is actually a school that uses the community school strategy, which is different than the word community school. So they've literally kind of called it, there's a strategy that is the name, which is confusing. So then I have to come and explain it. So this is a needs assessment that typically is done at the best types of community schools. So a community school coordinator, who I would change the name to, and you guys could do this, you guys have the power, change the name to the chief strategy person. That's what this person does at the best schools. So they literally are the ones that concentrate on what is the problems that we're dealing with. So maybe I'd call it chief problem solving officer. That's all their job really is. So they develop a team, a family team, a staff and educator team, a student team, and a community team. And the best schools spent 6 to 9 months working with those stakeholder groups to figure out what their needs and assets were. So you might think, like, do we need 6 months to understand what's wrong or what's right? And the answer is kind of yes, because you're not only trying to figure out what is going on, you want to figure out why. And the why is what a lot of times we don't know the answer to. And by the way, like, if we knew why, we would have fixed it already, right? But we haven't. So we're talking about what do the best community schools. So they have a coordinator who's the kind of chief problem-solving person. The second thing they do is they have a needs assessment that they dig really deep with stakeholders. So this is something that's not happening to schools. It's not happening to stakeholders. It's actually coming from them. You're asking them, what do you feel like we need? Why is it that you're not coming to school? And then they may tell you it's transportation, but then if you get a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, you might actually get to the root cause, which is where you're trying to go. So a lot of times schools stop early at the symptoms, so as opposed to finding the root cause and treating that. So no, it doesn't work in medicine, right? Like if you're always getting sick and they're always giving you Advil, right? As opposed to kind of finding out that you have something else that, will kind of cure the other part. That's what community schools are trying to do, is get you to the place where you're finally understanding the why. And sometimes there's like 5 whys until you understand it. The third thing that community schools is form these problem-solving teams. So you've done a lot of hard work, and you've gotten to 75 to 100% engagement over the course of 6 months. You have a deep understanding of what all your stakeholders need and want, and then what do you do with that? There's a good...
Go back to that slide. I'm going to throw questions up to you.
Yeah, good.
So in communities where the need is great, the graduation rate is low. Go back to that slide with your teams. That one.
Mm-hmm.
I would find it incredibly
Hard?
challenging to get people to come up and be on those teams.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a low-performing community that has given up on their sport. So,
Yeah. How they do it, right?
yeah.
So generally speaking, not everyone is engaged in these teams, right? Like it's a coalition of the willing in the beginning. So everyone at a lot of these schools have reform fatigue, right? They're like that's kind of like, oh, another thing.
Reform fatigue.
Yeah, I might coin that. Like just put this is on TV, right? So it's good.
Got it too, so we'll see.
Yeah, this is good. Like, we're going to coin a lot of things today. So you just work with the folks that are currently engaged, that are like kind of burned out already, but like still willing to do it. And then you work with them to expand their team. So that's the job of the community school coordinator, is to help build these teams. Now, usually at a school, this doesn't exist. So you don't have someone who's dedicated to saying, all right, we have 2 parents here, who else do you know? Right? And then someone else to say, all right, you're the same staff that always volunteer, who else would be good? Right? And then the coordinator's job can help build out these teams so they can do the deep needs assessment. And getting to 75 to 100% in a low-performing school with families, incredibly hard. But that's what these best schools have done. So there's a lot of strategies that they've done, and I've told your leadership team that as you guys go, I can connect you to all these places. We know them well. You could talk to the parents. You could talk to the school board members, the superintendent, the community school coordinators about how they accomplished a lot of these things. But I'll tell you that the strategies that work in Austin to get to deep parent engagement, may not be the strategies that work in Duluth, right? Like, so you have to kind of understand what makes families come out and then work with them in those places. So, good question. So I just wanted to show you a quick video of a needs assessment. Like, I'll just tell you that students, now we have a student here, when they do their needs assessment, it's not the adults that are coming up with like, all right, students, fill this out. We came up with some good questions for you, right? It's basically a community school coordinator working with students and saying, all right, so what questions should we be asking and how should we do it? So really let the students lead on it. So this is this is a video from a school in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and the students were sent around a video to their peers about, we want your opinion type of stuff. Students made this. So like, this school had never asked its students kind of what they wanted, but they let their students lead, and they were surprised by what they had to say. Sometimes they weren't surprised. The biggest thing that they asked for, they just wanted an adult to talk to. That was the biggest survey response. That's not like a rocket science thing to do. Maybe you could problem solve your way into figuring out an adult to talk to. It's really important for the stakeholders who are being surveyed and then focus grouped and then maybe surveyed again and focus grouped over the course of that time to find your root cause, to lead that process. And having the community school coordinator in place is the person who can finally, like it's a principal, if you talk to a principal, say, I'd like you to kind of lead a bunch of a needs assessment that gets you that deep and then run a bunch of problem-solving teams, I'm going to tell you that most of them will tell you, I don't have enough time. So that's why you put a community school coordinator in place to do that work. How are we doing on time, by the way? Oh, good. We're right on schedule. So the other thing we learned about the best practice community schools is that they tended to focus their needs assessment and their strategies in 6 key places. So they looked at their curriculum. So when you're doing your needs assessment, they asked their students, like, is your curriculum like engaging, or is it culturally relevant? Do you see yourself in it? They looked at teaching. So is our teaching practices able to meet the needs of students? Is it dynamic? Asking teachers that question. Like, maybe you learned how to, you went to teaching school, like, 20 years ago, and this is a very different, time or student population. So is professional development working? Coordinated integrated wraparound supports. It's really hard to learn if you're focused in on the trauma that you just experienced last year, and it's cycling in your head, or if you didn't eat in the morning, or if you can't see what are now smart boards, right? Like, those are barriers to learning. Positive discipline practices. So if the vibe in a school isn't good, that's kind of how I tend to see it. It doesn't tend to be a school that can rise to the challenge. Deep parent and family engagement and shared leadership, which is something that a principal has to bring to the table and say, I'm going to share leadership with staff so that we could lead the work. Most schools that kind of get from struggling to thriving don't do it because there's this like superman or superwoman that's pushing everyone forward. It's usually a big team dynamic. So the best community schools kind of focus in, have implemented strategies in these 6 key areas. So, yep.
Do those wraparound supports located within the schools, or are they just connections that the community school, the champion, makes?
Yep. So it's a mix that we've seen, right? So some, if you go to Cincinnati, you'll find they passed $1 billion measure to redesign all their schools so that those wraparound supports could be inside the school. If you go to other places, they have a mobile dental clinic that, like, a van drives up, a mobile eye clinic. So sometimes it just depends on the school. Sometimes if you have an underenrolled school, you have a lot of space, so you can house some of that stuff in there.
Kyle, can I add to that?
Yep.
I think what that's getting at is making sure we're getting kids connected to the services they need if it's interfering with learning. That's kind of how my take on that. But I wanted to share also that what I think is something we learned through this slide in particular is that you'll notice there's things on here that our continuous improvement teams are doing in our buildings. When you see number 4 around positive discipline practices, that's what we call PBIS. So there's lots of these types of things that are happening in a lot of our buildings. However, you'll notice in some of our buildings we might have a CIT, or a continuous improvement team, looking and focusing on some of this, and we might have a community school committee focused on other aspects. And so what I've learned through this process is how do we take all of those strategies that we're trying to implement throughout the day so that it's driven by our needs assessment and the data, and we've got clear teams focused on the work to make sure we're not duplicating efforts, and we don't have gaps in our teams, that there's focus. So I feel like that brings the whole picture of what we're trying to do in our current schools, how it all fits together is how I see it.
Yep. And you'll find, all right, there's 2 things in addition that you'll really want to know. We couldn't find a community school that just did wraparound supports that transformed. So don't think that you can get folks to see the blackboard or fix their mental health stuff and then all of a sudden it's going to work, right? We have very complex issues. Like, if it was simple, we would have already solved it, right? So we have to approach complex things with complex strategies. And so maybe one big takeaway is that the path to equity is through at least these 6 pillars. And the second thing I would say is that some of your schools are already doing some of these things. The purpose of the needs assessment is to, like a heat-seeking, not missile, but like something that's heat-seeking, to find where the gaps are so you can concentrate on those things. So another thing and so this is getting close to wrapping up. Remember that place in Cincinnati where 85% of the students were dropping out by the 10th grade? How many are going to college now? 62%. So this is Jamie, their Chief Problem Solving Officer, Community School Coordinator, and these are some of the teams that she set up. And it's just some. They have a community engagement team, and a mental health team, and a primary health team, and a vision team, and a dental team. And this is page 2. And this is page 3. And this is page 4. And there are a few other pages that have to do with the academic teams. But the point is that they didn't get from there, 85% dropping out by the 10th grade, to 62% going to college by magic. They created these problem-solving teams that got it wrong a ton of the time, but then got it right a lot of the time, and found out ways to change their outcomes. They did not limit who could go to that school. They just worked around the stakeholders that were there. So that's what all these community schools do. They create these problem-solving teams that are based out of what stakeholders say that they're going to do, or that are priorities, and then the community school coordinator works with them to solve those problems over and over and over until we get it right. And it's not an easy thing. It's just what it takes. So here's one example, then I'll kind of close for questions. This is a fictitious example. But let's say you did your needs assessment and you found that you knew already that third grade math scores were low. But we tend to like to simplify things a lot. Third grade math scores are low. Bet you those teachers should be teaching a little bit better, right? Which may or may not be true, right? But it's actually like way more complicated, right? So we did these things called fishbone diagrams to describe the complex nature that we found. So you take all that stuff from your needs assessment and you put it into a bit of a diagram, which is called a fishbone diagram, to figure out like what is the nature of why third grade math scores are low. So in this example, students are not going to class. Hard to learn math if you're not in class. So chronic absenteeism. Students have told you in their needs assessment they don't even get why math is important, right? Math class isn't fun, and it's not cool. All right, not cool. We could work on that. And then the educators are saying, we don't even have enough time to teach. So math class is too short, and even if we did think a student needed more, there's nothing to send them in the evening or in the morning to have better, because maybe the parents don't know third grade math. So what do you do with all this? The community school coordinator's job is to coach teams on how to kind of put all their needs into a diagram on this and then solve some of them systematically. No extended learning math opportunities. Community school coordinator works with a team to survey an appetite. People will need to, you can't just go and create after school math program and think that kids will want to come, right? You have to see whether they say they'll come. Research potential partners that are aligned to the curriculum, meet with potential partners to sign an MOU for a fun after-school math activity. So that's what community school coordinators do every day, right? They're thinking about what can help us get to our goal and then solving the problems with stakeholders every single kind of moment of the day. So their job is the one that you want to really erect big walls around, because if they can't focus on problem solving, then because every school could use another awesome person in it, but don't use that new awesome person, that new shiny person. You're like, oh man, you're so awesome, I want you to do this, this, and do that problem solving thing too, right? You just say, you're going to help us do problem solving, and you're going to help us make sure it's rooted in every single stakeholder's viewpoint. And that's what the best community schools do. They make sure that the stakeholders are driving a process and they're consistently problem solving. So maybe I'll end there. There's a lot more kind of technical stuff of community schools that we found. You don't even want me to get into driver diagrams and PDSA cycles, but because I love it. But know that your teams earlier today went really deep into these things and are learning about kind of the specific things that the best community schools do, and so that when you're thinking about your community schools and the new ones that you eventually want to create, that you're not making the same mistakes as a lot of other places, but you're kind of making your own new mistakes. And that's what we found, is that there's no scaling strategy on community schools until we entered the space. So we felt like it was important to pass on the best practices so that communities were finally connected and not atomized, and districts can learn from each other. So thank you.
Kyle, can I just add a couple things?
Sure.
Can you go back to the fishbone? Just for the board's knowledge, this process is what we trained our continuous improvement teams to do last year as part of a comprehensive needs assessment. So what's so cool about this whole conversation is this all mirrors the language and the tools that we use with our continuous improvement teams.
Even before you got schooled in community?
Yes, this is based in implementation science, and so that's where our background came in with training of the continuous improvement teams. They're using implementation science, and they're using those tools as well. And so it's all part of a comprehensive needs assessment. So I think what's happened in other communities and other districts, and probably in our district, is the community's done a comprehensive needs assessment, the school's done a comprehensive needs assessment, but they haven't looked at that data across all of those stakeholders to then identify what are we going to work on together. And there are some things that community stakeholders can work on. There's some things the educators can work on. But we should know what each of us are trying to tackle when it comes to that problem-solving approach. So I think we did identify today too that we probably have some duplication of teams. We have lots of different teams. So how do we really streamline our teams so they stay crystal clear in their focus and what they're trying to problem solve? And I think we recognize today too that we need more training in how to drill down even deeper. This is a very complicated process, so and it gets better, I think, the more you do it.
Yeah, I think another important thing that we talked about today is the process for expanding our community schools work, and knowing that research has shown and past experience has shown that you can't force this on a school, you can't force it on a community. It really has to be a grassroots effort. And so we talked about a process for schools to really apply to become community schools and expand our work that way, so that it really is coming from the needs of the community, and through that process of engaging the community, identifying the needs, and then working towards how do we address these needs, and having community school be a part of that.
Yep. And we have a community school institute that a lot of folks have gone to, and we're working with 50 districts, a little bit over 50 districts, to do kind of this exact same thing. So you can kind of learn from each other as you're scaling, and you can be connected with places that are already have already done it. Yeah.
So can I go back to that grassroots comment? Because I kept kind of thinking about that as a teacher for so many years, that if this isn't embraced by the school that we're working with, or we want to see that happen. So,
and I feel what has been embraced has been that continuous improvement process. So far, you've heard teams in the last few months give presentations on their continuous improvement plans, and a couple very positive comments stand out to me, just that some of them feel that they really have the tools they need to do this work well. So I feel like they need to recognize what they're doing is being part of a community school. And I think right now they see those as two separate systems. Mm-hmm. And so for our current schools, I think we've got to clean up that, we got to clarify what that looks like, so that they really understand the work they are doing as part of their continuous improvement teams is this work. And then now moving forward, if and when we expand to other schools, now we'll have the structure to be able to make sure staff really understand what is their role, and making sure we have buy-in from community and educators in that process.
And so do you think teachers that are coming out of college right now with their teaching degree have an understanding of community school-based teaching strategies? I mean, that would be another important layer, I think, as we move forward, not necessarily in our district, but as this strategy for improving equity across our country, would be that our colleges have to have knowledge and understand, so that teachers coming out. And I would think that if this is a successful model, it would attract teachers to your district. If they want to be involved in community school education, they would seek out jobs in your area. That would be mine.
I think what we're trying to get at when it comes to the instructional strategies and the curriculum work is just best practice when it comes to instruction. It's about general best practice. So I'm hoping that our teachers are coming out with those, but it's also about the shared leadership, so teachers are part of that problem-solving process.
That makes sense.
Oh. Yeah, all right, there we are. Yeah, as far as I can tell, there's not a lot of like deep improvement science work going on in our education schools, but it's usually the community school coordinator's job to be an educator to teach everyone in the building about how to do these problem solving, so it becomes one of the things you do inside a building, so that when you ask a question about how's that going or did it work, you can ask someone using the language of improvement science, what was your plan and what did you measure, right? So it's not just kind of like a homegrown, like, well, you know, I tried this, and you know, there's a way of doing things systematically.
Was your light on before mine? Okay. So one of the questions I have is around how we communicate this work. Our son is lucky to be at a full-service community school, and I think if I hadn't been on one of the early committees, I wouldn't necessarily know that. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that we want it to be a kind of a homegrown solution. But how do we help support the message, recognizing that as board members we don't want to get involved in operations, so the communication plan part of it isn't our responsibility, but how do we kind of help to create community buy-in and understanding around the community school models?
Yep, so as we know, right, like you say community school and people are like, huh, right, and like, yeah, I'm in one too, right, but they probably aren't, right? So number one is, at your existing community schools, you really want to trumpet the successes and talk about the community school strategy, helped achieve X, Y, and Z. So we often do great work and don't talk about it. So I think that's like, get it in the press, get it in like various, whoever's watching TV, the school board meetings, right? Like you can highlight those things. But I tend to tell people, have a communication strategy about talking about community schools. So when and if you guys do an application process, figure out ways to advertise it and launch it. Maybe you can have city council, you can have ribbon cuttings. There's like a lot of strategies that we can kind of share with other places that have talked about the community school strategy. When places are applying, you want to do webinars and in-person meetings to explain, all right, so how do we talk about community schools beyond the slogan, right? Community school, but actually describe what we did today about what it really is. So I imagine like some of you who aren't deeply steeped in community schools have a different understanding of what community schools are versus what you thought they were before you kind of learn what the best practice ones do. That's what schools need to know about before they jump in. That's what parents need to know. So forums, fun forums where you have bouncy houses and stuff, right? like integrate it into the fun stuff that happens and say there's an exciting, great new opportunity. We're going to do PDSA cycles, right? Maybe not that, but like lean on your communicators to figure out awesome ways to talk about it, and invent the wheel here because you'll know how to talk to your communities the best. But happy to connect you to like a lot of other places and share with you how they're talking to various stakeholders. Yeah.
So having one of the longest running community schools in the state, to my understanding.
That's Myers.
That would be Myers, yes. They're very successful at a lot of things. They're not entirely successful at everything. Their achievement has yet to meet par. I mean, they're middle of the pack still.
Yep.
And there's no way to prove currently what a community school contributes to achievement and how they get there. There's no magic piece, and I understand that from what you've told me, that there isn't, like, you can't do X, Y, and Z and get A, B, and C. It depends on the community. So my question is, we're going to be, if we are moving forward with the application process for more community schools, how are we going to oversee the current community schools that we have to ensure that they're still trying to improve on what they do to demonstrate that achievement to the rest of the community, for things in achievement that the community values, such as test scores, even though that's not what achievement is all about.
I just have one point on that then. So schools end up really measuring their success because the only way to really get to a place where you know you're doing better is to have some form of measurement.
Right.
So the best schools really do measure very specific things. Like if they say, like, if 85% of students are saying that they're unhappy, like they're measuring in multiple ways to figure out how to get from 85 to 50%, right? So the best community schools do measure a lot of things, and that's when we tend to ask folks in the beginning of the school year, work with your problem-solving teams to measure where you are, and then towards the end of the school year, when you've made a lot of gains, have press conferences, like trumpet your new successes so that you can feel good as a team. The other thing I'd mention is that your community school, was created before they even knew what community schools was, right? It was like, we're doing what makes sense, and then they learned about like the IEL and like the community school folks that were out there, which is a normal progression, right? But there's a lot of best practices that I think that they would say that they're maybe just focused in on a couple of the pillars, but expanding what they do and sharpening what they do based on some other best practices might help them get closer to the vision that they're seeking.
Well, that's kind of a follow-up question I have to you. I'm going to let you respond here in a second, but do we have teams in place that are open to relooking at how they do things?
One of the things I think we learned today is that we need to incorporate data into these problem-solving teams so that you're monitoring on a 90-day cycle whether the strategy that you're implementing is having the impact that you're trying to solve, the strategy that you're trying to solve. And then second to that is the work that we're doing as part of our problem-solving teams is incorporated into the school improvement plans so that those things are documented and that data is monitored. You heard me say what gets monitored gets done. And it's about making sure that you're really clear about what's your goal, what's your strategy, and how we're monitoring progress. And so I think by incorporating that into our school plans, that's going to allow for that accountability piece and being really clear. So we're not just looking at MCA scores. We're being really specific about this attendance data point or math grades, in a specific the grades in math are all passing in a certain grade or something like that. About being much more specific about the data point you're using, not just a global MCA score.
A deeper connection between what has been the CIT's focus, mainly academic, and the community schools focus, and merging those and making sure that they're both working in the same direction. And like Amy said, having a much tighter cycle of what we are measuring and how we're measuring it.
Yeah. But comments and questions. One is I love the whole idea of community schools and have been very supportive of our development across the district. So thank you. One of the things that was mentioned is in our education programs, does community schools come up? And I don't know that, but I went through the Master's Social Work program, and that's where I really learned more about community schools, was through that, and I actually did a couple papers on it and went down to Brooklyn Park to tour the community school there. So I think that's another avenue of community schools is also through our social workers within the district and what their roles could or could not be. And so that brings me to one question. The Community School Institute you talked about, does that institute train I will call them community organizers / resource directors, coordinators. Is that one of the roles that this institute plays, is to train the people who are in those positions in schools?
So the answer is kind of no. Like, the
Okay.
idea of the Institute is to level set a bunch of stakeholders
Okay.
On what the best community schools
Okay.
do, and then send them home so they can do some planning with, because only like 5 or 8 people can actually go.
Okay.
There's very little planning you can actually do in Milwaukee at our Community School Institute. But the idea is to set up meetings like we had today that are follow-up with a broad set of stakeholders. And the second thing is that we're actually thinking about creating a micro-credential for community school coordinators and things like that, right? But the thing that we think is most effective is pairing really high-performing community school coordinators with new community school coordinators.
Excellent. Okay.
So that they can make their own mistakes, but not kind of like, and you guys will be able to do it here. Like, I think there's a little bit of remodeling you need to do with your own community school coordinators to be able to do some of the skill sets that we talked about here. But like, once you do that, you're able to kind of really train each other. Like, you don't have to go to Austin to like go under that one. You could like work with your community school coordinator on the district level to kind of give those skill sets to those folks.
Okay, and then my second kind of question attached to that is, in the districts that went district-wide, like what period of time did they do that in?
Yeah, good question. It tends to be over a long period of time. It depends, like working in Prince George's County, which is the 25th largest school district. They have 200-something schools. Montgomery County, 200-something schools. They all like try to do like 5, 10, something a year, because even though you know best practices that I am telling you about, like figuring out how to do it in Duluth is something you need to figure out about, right? So you don't want to like open it up to the 13 schools here in the first year and then realize like, oops, like if we just scaled a little bit more moderately. I think it's what we found is that it's better to kind of set the goal of all of our schools are going to be community schools, but then create a pathway to do it. So it's like kind of responsible scaling. We've been behind unfortunate efforts to scale things in some cities that went way too fast, and some that went way too slow. So there's kind of like that mix. So I suggest, you guys should figure out how to do it well here, but I certainly think it's not bad to have a goal of saying all of our schools should be community schools one day, and a lot of places have existing community schools that need to kind of get normed to a best practice, and then you can get to the other ones. Like, you can do it in a lot of different ways. That's exactly what I was just going to add, that I think, at least personally, I feel that we need to get all of our community schools on the same page first before we start expanding. And so I think that's the first work in front of us, and then we talk about the application process for scale-up efforts. But I think that's where our team is currently at with that. Yeah. And the idea of an earlier conversation today is to write up a document that explains, I'm just going to call it a memo, that explains kind of what is the strategy? How do we get to 13 community schools, and what does it mean to do community schools, and how are we supporting on a district level? How are we supporting on an individual school level? What are the standards? Like all of those things, so that there's just a lot of clarity. A lot of folks just kind of jump into community schools organically or various ways, and then end up with a little bit of a hodgepodge and not exactly what they wanted, right? So better to kind of think through it first and then go for it. So I just want to make one final comment. I want to thank Bernie. Bernie and DFT are the ones who made the connections for us and brought our team in October. And so I certainly didn't want to take credit. I just wanted to make sure I give credit where credit's due. Go Bernie. Thanks, Bernie. And thanks so much. And I think what we've learned is you're going to be our coach. We're going to reach out to you and ask lots of questions. So get ready. Yep, we're here to support you guys every step of the way. May have to call in a lot of times, but every once in a while fly in and invite you guys to convenings that we have. Bringing all the cities that are working together on this together are really exciting times, right? Because everyone's kind of working on the same thing. But thank you. So what is the most important thing a school board member can do in being in a community that's moving forward to embrace community schools?
mean, what should we, I mean, because we're all here today, so obviously.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think this is an important part, is understanding what this process is and what this process isn't, what we're trying to accomplish, and being able to, as representatives of the school district and drivers of the school district, be able to make connections, realizing that it's all of our community partners that play a role in this. And sometimes it may be helping to make some connections, helping to make sure the right people are in the room, and sharing the message of what community schools are and what we're accomplishing.
And I have one other suggestion for school board members. There's getting consistency in strategies over time is hard for districts to do because of various factors. Like there are a lot of vicissitudes, like changes that go on, and school board members can add that consistency. So if folks are trying to go down a different route, like you guys can say, wait, we are here to see this through. So you can create policy, right? Like if this work that we are doing together to create this document, you can pass that in policy. So it's what the district does. There's also a really big role you can play in funding. So you can fund it through district efforts, right? But a lot of funds for community schools come from foundations, they come from cities, they come from the county. So you can leverage your position to say to the city council, to work with the city council and other stakeholders, will you pass a measure for $300,000 to fund our next community schools or something like that? So it's a partnership between the city and the district. There's tons of examples where there are partnerships between governmental entities to try to do it, because when you have students that are all of a sudden graduating and going to college, that lifts the city up. So tons of the stuff a school board member can do, in addition to getting good press for the schools, right? You can help actually fund and braid the system and lift it up as an equity strategy from your bully pulpit.
I think recognizing also that this is a strategy that can support the work through our World's Best Workforce Plan, and just understanding that that's a model and best practice when it comes to school improvement efforts. It nicely aligns to World's Best Workforce legislation and the goals that we have to monitor and the strategies we have to implement. So just recognizing that's an important district initiative, I think, is also an important role you play.
And so what I would ask my leadership to do too, even though our time is very important to all of us in our own other lives, is it would really be a cool session somewhere down the road, I don't know when, where we really brainstorm as a school board our message. So if we're going to go down to the state legislatures, I mean, you just said to craft your message, but I'm thinking, I don't think we need one message that all of us robotically share, but it would be a really cool workshop or retreat session to really wrap our head about how we as school board members write the policy. And when we talk to state legislators, we're going to be going down in a short while, like 6 weeks is our opportunity, and some of us are meeting regularly with our leadership in our communities as far as our state house representatives. And so as a board, I'd really love a session where we're really clear on how we communicate what we want to say about the policies and about the leadership and about the direction and about the equity direction and all of that.
And priorities.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can put on your calendar, April 19th, there's going to be a celebration of Myers Wilkins, the 20 years that's been in place, 5:30 to 7:30 up at CSS. So we're working on that right now, but I don't get an invite to it, but I just kind of wanted to put that on your calendar.
Can you tell me the time again?
5:30 to 7:30.